So I think we can go ahead and make a start. Good evening, good morning, or good whatever time of day it happens to be with those of you who are joining us, and welcome to Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. And thank you for making the time to be with us today for our webinar on the Chinese state's global promotion of Buddhism, featuring Professors Yoshiko Ashiwa and David Wank. My name is Peter Mandeville, and I'm a senior research fellow here at the Berkeley Center. This webinar today is part of a larger project that I've had the privilege of directing over the last few years that's based here at the Berkeley Center and is called The Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power. It's a research initiative that studies the various ways that state governments around the world incorporate religion and religious outreach as an aspect of their foreign policy and geopolitical conduct. And over the last few years, we have been publishing a wide range of working papers, short commentary pieces, and have a number of edited books in the works. We've also been conducting a series of live events and workshops, such as the one that you're attending this evening. This evening's presentation is based on a policy brief published just last week by our two authors, and we're very glad that they've been able to join us tonight to tell us a little bit about it. This series is a set of policy briefs aimed primarily at policymaking and practitioner audiences, but which we also hope will be of interest to a broader readership. They focus on a series of countries that tend to be of particular interest to students and followers of foreign policy today. So the policy briefs that we've already published in the series are India, Turkey, and Iran. We, of course, will be hearing about China tonight, and later this year, we'll be publishing one on Russia. If I could direct your attention to the chat box, I've just put up a series of links that will allow you to learn more about the Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power project, and you'll be able to access and download all of our publications associated with the project. You'll also find a link to the newly published policy brief on China that you'll be hearing about this evening, and you will also find links to the online biographies of our two speakers. And I will be turning over to them in a moment, but wanted to first tell you a little bit about the format of this evening's event and make a few housekeeping announcements. I wanted, first of all, to make sure that all of you are aware that the webinar this evening will be recorded. And those of you who have registered for the event will receive a link to access the video once that recording has been made available. When Professors Ashiwa and Wank have completed their presentation, we'll have some time available for Q&A and discussion with them. And we'll be conducting that using the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you open that, you'll find a window that will allow you to type your question, which will appear here on my side as moderator, and our speakers will also be able to see those, and we'll be able to work our way through those questions when we enter the Q&A period. So without further ado, let me introduce Professor Yasuko Ashiwa, who's a social anthropologist based at Hitotsubashi University, and Professor David Wank, a sociologist based at Sophia University, both of them joining us from their location in Japan, where it's already tomorrow. And so thank you both for being with us. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to you. Yoshiko, I believe you'll be speaking first.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, very much. I'm Yoshiko Ashiwa, and he's David Wank. And we greatly appreciate your kind invitation as to your very exciting series of this presentation talk. And we feel we try to send our gratitude for the Berkeley Center for organizing all, and thank you, Luz, very much for that. And so let me begin by introducing the project itself. This project of both research originated in the late 1980s with a study of the recovery of the Buddhism in China after Cultural Revolution. We are interested in the recovery as a political and institutional process on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're very much interested in as practice and values of the Chinese Buddhism, which has to cooperate with the values of the parties and the government in China. And we focused on the one temple, which name is Namputo Temple, located in the city of the shaman. And this temple has been a key station of the modern reform movement of Buddhism since the early 20th century. And it's one of the temples which has the quickest, fastest revival after the Cultural Revolution in China, because of the mainly because of the rich, very deep relationship with the overseas Chinese and the temples there. Part of our research was to trace these overseas networks to understand their effects on the recovery in China and their roles in the overseas Chinese communities. For this, we visited actually many temples in Asia, mainly Vietnam or Singapore or Sri Lanka or even India, and the North America, Canada and the US, and the European countries connected in some ways to this Namputo temple that we've been focusing on. And gradually we started to understand that there are many other temples from China coming up in this locale. And then these host countries, host communities has been gradually transformed by the effects of this Chinese Buddhist temples. And also the policy of the religion in China itself has been changed a lot and since 1980s. And especially from the 2015, it had drastically changed. In 2015, we noticed a big change actually, and these include increased exchanges between the temples in China and overseas, much greater amounts of the funding, and increased outreach beyond overseas Chinese communities to the general population in local communities and local, sometimes official institutions as well, such as universities and other things. So we are currently researching the changes since 2015 in a project supported by the Henry Luce Foundation. In the policy paper, we report on the political and institutional aspects. So next, David will summarize our policy paper. When he's finished it, I will conclude with a brief comments on the other aspects of the project that we couldn't include into our policy belief. So would you like to start?
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. Again, Peter, thanks very much for hosting us. Let me first preface my sort of summary of the policy paper by noting, as Yoshiko said, that we're really starting the project on the things we're writing about in this policy brief. So the policy brief reflects our observations accumulated over long-term research and reformulates them in a way to guide our research project that we'll be engaging in for the next few years. So what we've written here should be taken as somewhat tentative and providing a framework for our further empirical investigation, ideally through fieldwork if that is possible, or when that is possible again. So let me begin. So since Xi Jinping became leader of the People's Republic of China, PRC, in 2012, the Chinese state has been globally promoting Chinese Buddhism, intensified its global promotion of Chinese Buddhism. The aim is not to spread belief in Buddhism as religion, but rather to further the aspiration of the Chinese Communist Party, or the CPC, for China to be recognized as a country with a great civilization in the modern world. This aspiration is expressed in the China Dream, which Xi propounded in 2012 as a vision of China regaining its glory during the Tang Dynasty over a millennium ago. This was also the time when Buddhism from India was Sinicized into Chinese culture and flourished. When it flourished. Buddhism also underlies, or is connected to in some ways, Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. The trade routes across Central Asia and through the Indian Ocean parallel, of course, the old historical trade routes, which were also ways by which Buddhism came to China. Nowadays, of course, the flows and directions are reversed, from going from China out to Asian countries and the rest of the world. The global promotion of Buddhism reflects a view among the Chinese elite that the rise of China as an economic and political power needs to be accompanied by religious and political power. And Xi Jinping has said, quote, the excellent Chinese traditional culture is the outstanding advantage of the Chinese nation and our deepest cultural soft power. And he has also written that a country becomes powerful and prominent in the world, not only because they're economically and politically powerful, but because they have a culture that others seek to emulate. Now, Xi Jinping has also said that he sees Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism as the foundations of Chinese civilization. However, he favors Buddhism to convey it to the modern world. And he said this at a 2014 speech at UNESCO headquarters in Europe. He basically said that Confucianism is institutionally weak. By that, we presume he means it doesn't have a global network of temples to build on. He also said that Taoism is an indigenous religion. And by that, we assume he means that its appeal beyond Chinese communities is somewhat limited. In contrast, Buddhism is already a world religion, and it is found as religion or cultural practices in almost every single country in the world in some form or another. And we see the Chinese state's global promotion of Buddhism as analogous to the historical rise of European global power accompanied by Christianity. Our key claim here is that this global promotion operates as both soft and sharp power. We refer to it as sharp power because it occurs through the state system of religion designed to control religion and to use it for domestic and international aims of the Communist Party. So the promotion can also be targeted for specific aims and purposes in other countries. It is also instructive at this point to point out that the PRC is the world's largest Buddhist country. It contains all three traditions, the Mahayana tradition, Buddhism practiced by Han Chinese, Theravada practiced by the Dai people, and the Vajrayana Buddhism practiced by Tibetans and Mongolians. Millions, hundreds of millions of Chinese go to temples to worship as a custom. They worship for health and fortune, safety of their families, and so forth. Although only a small percentage have taken the precepts to be formally considered as devotees. Let me first look at the state religious system in the PRC through which the global promotion, the current promotion operates. This system goes back to the foundings of the People's Republic of China in 1949. Now, it's important to note that the Communist Party, it's an atheist political party that forbids members from believing in a religion, but it has recognized from the beginning the existence of religion. 5 religions, including Buddhism. To control religious belief, the Communist Party has created a system of institutions and organizations that can mobilize religion to work for aims defined by the CPC. But aspects of this system, as I said before, predate the founding of the PRC. Questions of religious freedom in the Constitution go back to the founding of the first modern Chinese state in 1912. The system's propagation of nationalistic forms of Chinese Buddhism as universal values and ethics was already foreshadowed in the 1920s by modernizing monks, such as Taishu. And the operation of the system by the Communist Party is based on its United Front strategy, Tongyi Jianxian, which was devised in the 1930s. And this is a strategy to identify and co-opt influential persons in non-CCP groups, such as religion, to work for CPC aims, while also identifying enemies and marginalizing or isolating them. The current religious system was founded in the 1950s. Its key institution is patriotic religion, which is expressed in the slogan, love country, love religion, ai guo, ai jiao, which basically means that clerics, religious personnel, must obey the Communist Party and work for its goals. There are 3 key organizational actors. The most powerful is the United Front Work Department within the Communist Party. And this actually handles manages the relations with influential persons in non-party groups and develops the Communist Party ideological position towards the groups, including religion. The second actor is in the government, which is the state administration of religious affairs that turns the Communist Party policy ideology into policies and implements them. And the third actor is the Buddhist Association of China, or the BAC, BAC, which is composed of influential clerics, and they work to adjust the state religious policies to the situation of Buddhism and get Buddhists to comply and go along with them. The entire system, though, is managed by the United Front Work Department of the Communist Party. Now, we divide the operation into three periods, the operation of the system. And here we'll simply focus on how the system is operated to use Buddhism internationally, which is of relevance to the webinar. During the first period, from the early 1950s until the Cultural Revolution in 1966, Buddhism was used primarily for diplomacy, well, only for diplomacy with other Asian Buddhist countries. And the aim of this, what we call Buddhist diplomacy, has been described by Holmes Welch, a very prominent expert on Chinese Buddhism, who wrote sort of the classic book Buddhism under Mao, covering this period, 1950 to 1966. He wrote that, quote, in any Asian neighbor where a segment of society like the Sangha, the Buddhist communities, came to look at China as a model or fell under the domination of a pro-Chinese faction, it slightly increased the internal pressure on the government of that country to adopt a pro-Chinese foreign policy. So again, the emphasis is on sort of foreign policy issues. And the visible face of the implementation is the BAC, the clerics, although the strategies and where they go and what they say are devised by the United Front Work Bureau and the Foreign Ministry. And strategies have included giving Buddhist relics, lending Buddha relics to other countries, providing funds to rebuild temples in other countries, creating bilateral friendship associations, and having Chinese Buddhist clerics take leadership in international Buddhist organizations. However, during this period, the diplomacy appears to be of limited effectiveness, according to Holmes Welch. This was because many of the countries at the time were actually anti-communist and didn't recognize the PRC. Instead, they recognized the Republic of China on Taiwan. And so only a few bilateral friendship organizations were formed, actually mostly with Japan, according to Holmes Welch. And also international organizations resisted BAC efforts to politicize them, such as the Buddhist Association of China tried to prevent international organizations from seating delegations from Taiwan. And that was rejected, which prompted, in one case, a walkout of the Chinese Buddhists in 1961 from a meeting in Phnom Penh. The second period of state use of the Communist Party use of Buddhism internationally is from 1979 until the early 2000s. And this is the period after the Cultural Revolution, which ended in 1976. And so this period is really coterminous with the recovery of Buddhism, as well as other religions, from their suppression during the Cultural Revolution. And it began, of course, by the Communist Party re-recognizing the existence of religion. And during the 1980s, Buddhism worked to help persuade overseas Chinese business people to come back and invest in China. China was now also promoting a market reform policy. And by showing tolerance towards Buddhism, the Communist Party was trying to persuade overseas Chinese that they're no longer following extreme leftist socialist policies. It was okay to come back and worship and invest. Relic visits also resumed in the 1990s, partly to improve China's image after the violent suppression in the 1989 student movement, and also to assuage growing unease in Asia about China's growing economic influence. Relic visits resumed to other Asian countries, as well this time to support the One China policy. So in 2002, there was a relic visit to Taiwan, stressing the underlying cultural unity of the People's Republic and Republic of China as Chinese culture. Also, the BAC launched what's called the China, it launched various types of friendship associations. The third period starts in the early 2000s, the third period of Communist Party use, when the Communist Party was coming to see China as a world power and emphasizing traditional Chinese culture. The Chinese leader at that time, who came into office in 2002, Hu Jintao, emphasized, began using a religious term, harmony, to emphasize the underlying principle of his policies in China and as well as abroad. And some say that harmony comes from, it's a Confucian term. However, the Buddhist Association of China embraced the term harmony by emphasizing Buddhism as cultural practices such as tea ceremony and meditation for the people. In 2006, the Buddhist Association of China also reintroduced itself to global Buddhist society by convening the World Buddhist Forum. And this was the first major international religious conference in the People's Republic since its founding. And its main theme was harmonious society, which was the slogan of Hu Jintao. And it sought to further dialogue among the Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana schools, attended by delegations from dozens of Buddhist countries. This is a major event. Also, you began to have the first branch temple from China was founded abroad during this period. This was the founding of the Zhonghua temple in Lumbini in Nepal, which is the birthplace of the Buddha. And this was very different from previous temples that had been founded to serve overseas Chinese. This temple was founded to establish a Chinese presence in the most sacred Buddhist site, and also it's a UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site. Then in 2015, so after Xi Jinping came to power in 2013, more resources were directed to this promotion. And in 2015, the Buddhist Association of China formally adopted the global promotion of Buddhism as a key activity for the next 5 years. And it called for Buddhism to go out, so to go out into the world in order to go out of countries in order to, quote, tell the Chinese story well, so that people, unquote, so that people could realize China's accomplishments and its peaceful intentions, and so that the value of harmony in Chinese Buddhism could be used to promote global peace and environmentalism. And these were all the things talked about at the in 2015 at a National Buddhist Congress. All these efforts were referred to as soft power, public diplomacy, and person-to-person diplomacy. Now, the Congress determined at this in 2015 that this effort by Buddhists in China was necessary because Chinese Buddhism was relatively weak around the world in terms of status and influence. The Congress noted that Tibetan Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism were globally recognized brands, unquote, pinpai, quote, while Japan and Taiwan had successfully spread their Buddhisms to many countries. And it called for new approaches to promote Chinese Buddhism, including Buddhist cultural activities, joint research with foreign scholars, and overseas branches of Buddhist temples. We see the Buddhist Association of China as emphasizing 3 forms of Buddhism, and these are sort of discourses of Buddhism that are also approved for use by the Communist Party. One of them is sinicized Buddhism, or Zhongguo Hua Fojiao. And sinicization has long referred to the historical process by which Buddhism from North India adapted to China in the Tang Dynasty and flourished. But now the term has been politically adapted to refer to the incorporation of Chinese values into Chinese Buddhism. And this is true of the other religions as well in China that I recognize. This is going on for all of them. A second form is Chinese Buddhism, or Zhongguo Fojiao. And the term previously referred to the coexistence of the Mahayana, Theravada, and Vajrayana traditions in China under the control umbrella of the Buddhist Association. But now it also refers to Chinese Buddhism as the center of all Buddhisms in the world. And I must say that one of the things, we're still working on the distinctions here between sinicized Buddhism or Chinese Buddhism and between sinicized Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism. So we're still working on what are the distinctions. There are overlaps and it's a little unclear, at least to us. The third is Buddhist culture, or Fujiao Wenhua. And this refers to Chinese Buddhist inspired values and practices that people can pursue as lifestyles and hobbies without knowing anything about Buddhist teachings. The global promotion also relies on clerics who have been educated in the state-approved Buddhist academies of the PRC in the 1980s. So all the people doing this are generally younger generation monks who have been educated after the Cultural Revolution. They understand the CPC discourses and expectations for religion, and they know how to operate and cooperate with the state religious system. And some are temple abbots in China. Others are Chinese monks who have already gone abroad, but cooperate because cooperation brings lots of funding and status enhancement and so forth, and allows them to keep their links with Buddhism in China. Let's see, the strategies to promote Chinese Buddhism in particular countries reflects that country's history of Buddhism, strategic importance to the PRC, and let's see, and also immigration from the PRC. And so based on these three criteria, we identify three categories of countries that differ in terms of the kind of strategies deployed by the religious system and the expectations as well for what they can achieve. So the first category are Asian countries with Buddhist majorities that are economically dependent on China, such as Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, Mongolia, Sri Lanka. And we list the strategies in the policy paper, but they include establishing bilateral friendship associations, setting up Buddhist broadcasting networks, organizing joint religious and cultural rituals, such as praying for people's health during the current coronavirus pandemic, providing funds to restore temples, and so on. Okay. The second category of countries are Western countries with recent histories of Buddhism and growing popular appreciation of Buddhist culture as Asian culture in daily life. And in these countries, we see efforts to establish branch temples and to build very large Buddhist temples that are almost like Chinese cultural theme parks for people. As well as for Buddhists, they can also be Buddhist temples, but they have an appeal beyond that as Chinese cultural theme parks. And they're especially visible in countries such as Australia. Well, okay, I'll move on. Yeah. The third are strategies for Asian countries that the Communist Party sees as geopolitical rivals, and the Bach views as competing for global status in Buddhism, mainly India, Japan, and Taiwan. In regard to India, there's some competition to be recognized as the center of Buddhist Chinese teachings. Of course, India has Nalanda, which 2,000 years old, and when Buddhism first began, it became a center of Buddhist teaching. China has recently set up an academy called the Nanhai Buddhist Academy, which the Chinese media refers as the Chinese Nalanda. It's a major center for creating Buddhist culture. It's also working to Sinicize Buddhism by getting rid of Sanskrit as a foundational language for learning Buddhism and replace it with Chinese as one of the Chinese, Pali, and Tibetan. In regard to Japan, Chinese clerics are coming to try to regain Vajrayana lineages that have disappeared in China but are still found in Japan, such as Shingon, and bring them back to Japan to make Buddhism in China more complete. And in the case of Taiwan, various types of disaster relief and charity activities abroad compete with Chinese Buddhist organizations like Tzuchi, Buddhist Tzuchi Foundation. What are the effectiveness of all these? Well, first, many activities create networks, which is one of the main goals of the United Front strategy. They create networks between Chinese actors and overseas prominent clerics, ministers of culture, heads of state, and so forth. Secondly, the temple building projects in other countries may bolster the status of Chinese clerics in those countries, increasing their voice in the public sphere and diminishing those of other Buddhist groups that the Communist Party doesn't like, such as Tibetan Buddhist groups linked to the Dalai Lama. And third, giving resources to Buddhist temples in other countries creates various kinds of dependencies on Chinese sources and temples that allows China to exert some influence in leadership of these temples in other countries. The future effectiveness of these strategies may rest on two tendencies of the Chinese state. One is the degree to which Sinocentric and nationalistic Chinese Buddhism appeals to Buddhists and non-Buddhists in other countries. And the second is the degree to which populations and politicians come to see these projects as politicizing. Let me jump now to the conclusion. We see the global promotion since 2015 as of Chinese Buddhism by the Communist Party as soft and sharp power as unprecedented in the modern world. The closest parallel is the Japanese military government's use of Buddhism in the early 20th century in its colonial empire. And by using Buddhism, the government sought to legitimate Japan's invasion of Asian Buddhist countries, but history shows that it actually caused strong anti-Japanese sentiments. And the current Chinese promotion is operating on a much faster scale. An issue that the Communist Party will have to face is how Sinicized Buddhism representing the excellent Chinese culture will cooperate with other locally embedded Buddhist traditions in Asian countries, as well as Westernized Buddhisms that seek ecumenicism. So thank you very much.
Okay,
Yoshiko,
thank you. Hi. So following David's last comments of ecumenicism and the influence of Sinonized Buddhism on the Buddhist countries, on the Buddhist culture in each kind of countries that where the Chinese Buddhism get into, we have several further items of the research focuses. And one of the research focuses is that actually I can divide it into two focuses. One is for the more systematically institutional, organizational aspects. The other aspects is the people's values, sense of consciousness of the images. So let me bring one example of the one side of the research we may conduct, which is the consciousness and values. The most important discipline of the Buddhism is not to kill. This is no matter any kind of Buddhism, this basic teaching is, the core teaching is not to kill. And also they have, Buddhism has a kind of image of the leaders. So through the tradition of Buddhism, leader can be king, or in the current situation like a president or political leaders. The image of the Buddhism which for these leaders has been kind of they said in Buddhist term chakravartin, which is can be a future Buddha, the Bodhisattva. So this image of the leaders has to be someone who has to give the largest benefit to the people and prevent people from being killed. He should not kill, and he or she should not kill anyone, and including the animals and the trees and the plants and the things. So we are really wondering that how the image of the leader in current modern political circumstances will affect the activities and the consciousness of the believers, both Chinese within China and in the non-Chinese Buddhists abroad and the people. So this is one of the particular interests, but there are many other focuses on the term in the issues of the values and consciousness. And these issues will be immersed within the field of confrontations of Chinese values with the values on the local communities and local Buddhism. So we are looking forward to our discussion, continued discussion with you, moderated by Peter, please.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Yoshiko and David, so much for such a rich presentation. I have so many questions of my own, and I know that we all wish you the best with the research and hope that it will indeed be possible for you to soon do the data collection and field work that you're hoping to do. So we already have 4 questions and or comments in the box, and I'm going to work through them, maybe sort of sequencing them in a way that will kind of perhaps produce a nice flow to the discussion. So I wanted to start just by briefly referring to a comment from Charles Jones that I think maybe he offered in response to your the point that you made about how you're still working with the terminology and distinction between Sinicized Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism. And he suggests, I think as a comment just for your consideration, possibly a distinction between quote unquote Chinese Buddhism and China's Buddhism. So I'll just put that there. I want to start with an intriguing question from Peter Riddell, and I'm going to follow this up with one of my own, just because his question nicely cues mine up. So he mentions that many of the methods and strategies that you describe are reminiscent of government-sponsored promotion of Islam around the world by Gulf states using oil funds. For example, construction of mosques, creation of study centers and universities, friendship associations, broadcasting networks, internet outreach. And Peter, the reason I'm so glad you asked this question is that one of the principal products coming out of our project here at Georgetown is an edited volume called Wahhabism and the World, Understanding Saudi Arabia's Global Impact on Islam, that is attempting to be sort of the first systematic, comprehensive, and multidisciplinary analysis of Saudi religious transnationalism. So his question to you, Yoshiko and David, is, are there any signs that the Chinese government and the BAC are looking at other strategies for promoting religions by other governments? Is there any evidence of learned behavior on the part of the Chinese from watching other governments engage in similar kinds of religious propagation activities?
All right. It's good questions. You want to talk? Yeah.
Okay, I'll start, and then please, Yoshiko. Excellent question. Thank you very much. The models that we're aware of that the Buddhist Association of China has been following come really from what Taiwan has been doing to a large degree. During the 1990s in our research, we began noting that the Buddhist Association of China was sending delegations to places like Australia, where they were visiting Fo Guangshan temples that do a lot of these things, construct temples, engage in outreach and activities beyond simply Buddhist communities to general populations. So one model, one model, charity and so forth, one model for these things has been Fo Guangshan. Of course, Fo Guangshan itself built on traditions coming out of the modern China Buddhist reform movement in the 1920s. So some of these ideas also go back a little bit within Chinese Buddhism, go back and predate 1949. In terms of looking at what Islamic governments have been doing and so forth, that's an interesting question. We'd love to explore further. Okay. Yeah, Yoshiko, would you?
Yeah, it's very excellent questions. That is something we are looking forward to continue a discussion with the sides of the comparison.
Yeah.
What happened in the Islamic societies and what have the other religions as well, like a Hindu things. So my additional comment is this, and also additional comment to who is it?
Peter Riddell.
Peter Riddell, yes, is that does the Islamic countries' activities abroad is only for the Islamic people or something beyond the Islamic people in the host countries? In case of the Buddhism, the definition who is Buddhism, who is not Buddhism is very vague. And as we explained it, that there are people who consider themselves, they make a vows for the 5 precepts. They are pure Buddhism. But like me or David also can visit the Buddhist temple, and they said, okay, you can be Buddhist.
They all assume you're a Buddhist.
So this is huge differences between the Islamic approach to the other countries and the Buddhist approach to the other countries. So in case of Buddhism, we think it's in a sense, in abroad, they're more open than the Islam. they invited many tourists and many people to come even the center of the shrines. And they have no objection that they can make a bow and the donation, the things. And they are trying to best to do social welfare beyond the Buddhist communities too. So I think this is interesting points for the comparison.
Yeah, I would also add on to this that one of the main points of the promotion, as we've said before, is not to promote Buddhism as religion to Buddhists. It's really to promote Chinese culture.
Yeah.
And so again, we're not quite sure whether the attempts by Islamic governments, are they trying to promote some kind of Islamic culture which is separate from any belief or understanding of the teachings. In the case of what the Chinese government doing, that's so. You can practice, Shaolin martial arts and have absolutely no understanding at all of Buddhism, and the government's happy with that. That's a goal.
Yeah, and that's why they promote more cultural aspects such as the meditation center, practice of meditation, open their door for the non-Buddhist people too, and also like a cuisines, the vegetarian food and the health retreat for 1 week or 1 month. There's also promotion of Buddhism in a sense, but promotion of the Chinese culture and open the door for the non-Buddhist people. So this is the kind of strategies of Chinese Buddhist global operations, we say.
Okay.
But actually, what Buddhists have been doing years.
Yeah, for years. Yeah.
Got it. So I'll use Peter's question, the opportunity of Peter's question, to pose my own, precisely because it's my own comparative work on Arab Gulf state-sponsored religious propagation activities that prompted this question. One of the things that's come through very clearly in our work on Saudi Arabia is that I think a previous assumption that many have had that these transnational religious influences are unidirectional in nature is actually challenged by the research data that we collected, which shows that it's at very least a two-way, if not multi-vectoral phenomenon. So I'm wondering if in your work at all you've detected any signs or evidence that the same conduits and lines of connectivity by which the Chinese state seeks to propagate Chinese Buddhism also serve its conduits to bring certain kinds of influences back into China as well.
Influences
back to China.
Influences, do you mean anything coming from abroad back into China?
But I mean particularly religious influences. Obviously Chinese, transnational Chinese state-sponsored Buddhism will encounter other forms of Buddhism out in the world. And is there any evidence that there is then a sort of return dynamic whereby those other religious ideas travel back into China?
It's difficult to say. Influence in terms of teachings and contents, we are not sure yet. And any activities in China, even the activities of Buddhism in abroad by Chinese Buddhist temple, are under the control of the observations of the government. That's very clear. So we cannot say any direct influence from the activities abroad in Buddhism without any controlling observations of the states in China. We're not sure about it. But it's in areas such as like a technology, like having special museum of the Buddhism attached to the temple using high tech and all kinds of, visual museum to show the history of the Buddha's life and everything, like an auditorium place being emerged here there in mainland China. The technology has been probably introduced from abroad, but this kind of technology, architecture, or things are maybe introduced or might emerge in China, but we're not sure about the teaching contents and also process of the mobilizations of the people, believers.
Yeah, I guess also, Peter, in response, if your question is specifically with the demarc after 2015, have there been any, that's a difficult question to answer, but clearly, for quite a while, you have had exchanges back and forth. Yes. And that, we, for example, about 10 years ago, we went to Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's, who's one of the founders of Engaged Buddhism. And we found a Chinese monk there who was in the village, wanted to learn about it, who's going to then go back his temple in China. And we were sort of wondering, okay, how is he going to be using ideas of engaged Buddhism back in China? What will he do? Well, and it's an empirical question, and we'd like to explore these kinds of things further.
Yeah, and of course, can I just continue? It's a very interesting question because, of course, in the early 20th century, it is very clear that the Chinese Buddhist recovery or promotions, being they use the Christian technique of making church and making how do you say Christmas, so decoration of the church, open the door, the social welfare activities, educations in the schools, everything. They copied almost the Christian technique for promotion of Buddhism in that China. So in that aspect, it was there, but it's not sure what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's unclear.
But the diplomatic way of using the religions, the Buddhism, but abroad, is in a sense a copy of the what the Western has been done the colonial time up to now using Christianity. So that's kind of influence we can see as a kind of.
Okay, great, thank you. I can't wait to compare notes with you further on this kind of stuff. But so questions have been coming in thick and fast, and we have no fewer than 12 questions lined up in the chat box at this point. And so I'm very glad to hear that you mentioned that you will be able to stay at least a little bit past the hour, because it might take us that long to get past get through these incredibly rich questions. So here's one from Ray Lu, who asks, whether in the case of PRC, Buddhists, Confucianists, Taoists, are there patriotism associations there, kind of like with the Roman Catholic tradition? And you know, does this state sponsorship of Buddhism abroad go so far as to involve, for example, monks and lay adherents acting as spies or agents in foreign countries, as some staff associated with Confucian institutes have been in some cases? And he also asks, for the uninitiated, you know, how could one tell or discern the difference between a quote unquote authentic form of Buddhism and a PRC propaganda operation?
Okay, all excellent questions. First of all, yes, I mean, each one of the recognized religions in China, Buddhism, Taoism, Catholicism, Islam, and Protestantism, has the same kind of system we described for Buddhism exists for that. There's a patriotic association with a center, local branches, and control focuses on managing temples as local sites of the policy and so forth. As I did mention, though, I mean, Taoism is not being promoted abroad to the same extent that Buddhism is, because it's seen as not having much appeal beyond Chinese communities. The use of the term spies and so forth, we have never thought of the monks as spies. I mean, we know some monks, we've known them for 30 years, who are abroad and involved in this, and they're very sincere. Now, I think that there are different degrees of commitment to implementing the Communist Party or working with the Communist Party. But I would not say that the monks themselves should be viewed as spies. In fact, one of the interesting things is that you mentioned the Confucius Institutes, and those were founded in 2008, also as a way to promote Chinese culture. And those have received blowback, particularly in Western countries. There's been a lot of blowback. They're seen as politicizing. They're seen as interfering with academic freedom. Some universities have stopped relations, so they're controversial. They are too obviously political. They're associated with the Chinese government NGO, which is really part of the Ministry of Education. And so they're really, whereas in the case of Buddhism is less clearly it's been in China for, over 1,000 years. It's less clearly a creation of the Communist Party and the state system. Maybe the Communist Party now is trying to work through it and hope that it will be perceived as less politically confrontational than Confucianism was. So, but we have to see,
May I add one thing?
Of course.
I tried to bring one example, one case, factual case for answering to these questions. That I don't like to divide it, which Buddhism is more authentic and which is more China Communist Party controlled one,
Right.
because there's layers. Buddhism has very serious teachings, and the Chinese monks pursue that kind of teaching, the practice as well, and some of them. And they are on the surface, they have to have a symbiotic relationship with the government too, and also to be more popular among their people. They put more stress on the aspects of culture. And Buddhism itself is a teaching as well as being a civilization in China years, architecture, arts, and all things. So that aspect has been more stressed in last 10 years or so. So it's difficult to say what is authentic Buddhism, what is not. And also, most of the monks, young monks now, has been educated in a Buddhist academy, which has been established after 1980s. So the old monk who was educated before the Cultural Revolution, who was the kind of founding fathers of the revival movement of the Buddhism in 1980s. At the moment, there were some confrontations, a kind of trouble adjusting with the party. But now all the monks, we can say, are educated under the Communist Party's Buddhist schools. So they learned their Buddhism by that way. So this is one of the kind of hint we can understand the current Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism in China as well as in abroad.
Also, one final point, the idea of authentic Buddhism versus Chinese Communist Party propaganda, that's not a distinction we make. And in fact, a number of the things the Communist Party is doing is not necessarily Communist Party, but these are sort of trends in modern Buddhism you might find in other countries. I mean, Buddhism is culture. You have meditation now practiced and Google and Apple headquarters, and there are debates in Tricycle magazine, or is this Buddhism or not? Is it a corruption? I mean, so these issues, one could argue, are not simply Communist Party, but these are issues related to sort of modern consumer movements, modern states, and so forth more broadly. At least that's our sort of way we're looking at it.
Okay, thank you. Next question coming from Nidhi Srinivas, who asks, David and Yoshiko, what are the organizational vehicles through which the Chinese government promotes soft power Buddhism? For example, do they create globally branded nonprofit organizations outwardly not linked to the Chinese state, or do they invest in wider and messier forms of social mobilizing? Thank you.
Start with that? Excellent question, Nidhi. And one thing is, so the idea of globally branding an organization, the government tried that with the Confucius Institutes, and those immediately became identified with the Communist Party and the Chinese state. So we're assuming, this is a kind of hypothesis, that the government has learned from that and is working in more diffuse forms. So for example, in some countries, it's set up networks of rural development projects like water purification operating through, the Buddhist Association of China operating through the foreign ministry in that country. So they're creating a lot of, it seems to us at this point, country-specific arrangements. There are certain models, but they're not, there's no globally branded single organization like the Confucius Institutes that's conveying it. So that's
right. But we're not sure how this strategy has been made, by which institutions. Are there any communication among the institutions in China between the Buddhist Association and the religious bureaus? That we are not sure yet. So that's how we drive the research, focusing on one temple and a few sites, and then make a comparison that we're trying to do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So the next question comes from our good friend and colleague, Susan Hayward. And it's kind of another version of another question about whether it goes both ways. So she asks, clearly the Chinese government is instrumentalizing Buddhism in these efforts to advance its own political and economic interests. But are there ways that Buddhists in China are instrumentalizing the state to its own benefits vis-a-vis these tactics? How are Buddhists taking advantage of this policy to advance their own interests, whether religious or political or otherwise?
Big question.
Yeah, that's it's yes. Still, it's in process of speculations, and also we have few examples we have researched that can be good hints for this answer. At this moment, I can say that it depends on the agencies, and if it's a large-scale temple, major temple in China, having a direct relationship with other branches in Canada or other places or something, they have to go with the government, definitely.
Yeah.
And they need a support, maybe from the local clients, financial support, a businessman, huge businessman who may have a branch in Canada, some places. But they also need a permission from the government. So in this case, the huge temple can go, monastery can go with the government. But we also met many other young scholarly monks who've been studying in Sri Lanka or other temples, Singapore, other places. They are pretty much independent, self-supported monk. The family supported the monk and nuns to have education abroad, to have promotion of the spiritual status, and then to look for the good masters here, there. Should not be a Chinese master, can be other masters as well. So this is not going definitely with the Chinese government utilization of the Buddhism itself as a tool. So there are various waves of this. So for this presentation, we put more focus on this state diplomatic relationship of Buddhism as the sharp power. But there are many other people in the way.
Let me also build on that and just say that this focus on Buddhism abroad, in fact, is not, I mean, we did this in a sense for a policy paper and the project, which is looking at soft power. But in fact, the system we referred to, the ways it's operating in China and the ways that Buddhists relate to it, to secure their position or whatever. I mean, this is sort of a global framework, and there's no the system in China, the ways it's operating. At least our initial hypothesis is it's not that much different from the ways pressure is being exerted outside China as well. And the strategies of monks abroad to go along with the United Front Work Department and do things to get greater recognition is what major temples in China do as well.
And again, may I continue? We saw, when we travel around the Buddhist sites in the world, we started to see more and more Chinese young travelers in major Buddhist sites in abroad, in especially last 5 years or so. And that we couldn't expect at all in 1980s or something, 90s. Now there are huge number of the young Chinese mainland Chinese people has more interest in Buddhism and explore this kind of global Buddhist experiences by themselves. So that's why we also put attention on the issues of values and the consciousness among the society and the people. And at some point, who knows, this consciousness and values of the people, Buddhist people, may confront with the Buddhism which is promoted by the state. So that's we mentioned about the image of the leaders, like political leaders or Buddhist king or something will be also questioned when these large populations who can move around by themselves, find their own Buddhism by themselves, may create this kind of image too.
Great, thank you very much. So next up is Jeff Wang, who asked whether you can talk about how this promotion of Buddhism by the Chinese government has influenced American societies. American society, so can you maybe talk a little bit about what the textures of this look like in the United States context?
Well, first of all,
we can talk.
Again, we're at the start of our research, and this was sort of one of the questions of inquiry. But I think maybe can we rephrase the question, just look at what are some of the effects of the promotion in other countries. I mean, the US, again, is very large. There are a vast number of ethnic Buddhisms, and So it's at this point, this is still an open question for us as well. But Yoshiko, do you want to?
But in case of US, that's we sensed in last 20 years or something. US already had already some Japanese Buddhism or the Western Buddhism and the Tibetan Buddhism as well. And then they are having somehow ecumenical communications among the Buddhism. And then we know we may be able to call it a kind of American Buddhism, whatever. And so Chinese Buddhism is a newcomer, and the Korean Buddhism too, to this environment. So we speculate that this ecumenical circumstances of American Buddhism may give some influence to the Chinese Buddhism itself. So this is how Chinese. This is, we don't want to give the image that the Chinese Buddhism are dominating all the Buddhism in the world. No, that's not true. But this Chinese Buddhism itself have a great potentiality that the Chinese Buddhism will be influenced by the local Buddhism. I think in case of US, this can be happened.
That could happen in the US. The degrees to which those lessons that Chinese Buddhists in the US might learn then go back and influence the situation in China is a totally separate question. But the issue of influences can probably be seen more clearly in some other Western countries that have larger Chinese populations, particularly recent PRC immigrants like Australia and Canada, for example, where you, in fact, in both these countries have these massive temple building operations that have received national publicity and are being presented as images. Well, of course, there are Buddhist pilgrimage sites for Buddhists, but they're also really seen as Chinese culture. They're being branded as peace parks and so forth. They're raising the status of Chinese Buddhist clerics associated with these projects within Canada and Australia, and increase. So there are concrete effects that can be seen in some other Western countries, maybe Italy as well, which has formally joined the BRI. We're going to be looking at that next for our research. So that would be our answer at this point, but it's an excellent question. And you can see effects more clearly in actually Asian countries in certain cases, but that wasn't the question, so we won't get into that.
Okay, thanks. So this next question comes from someone who looks to potentially be a colleague of yours, David. This is Kyo Okita from Sophia University, who says, you spoke about the attempt to replace Sanskrit with Chinese. And she asked, where does the Pali language fit into this? Also, you spoke about the attitude toward India, Japan, and Taiwan. What is the policy towards Sri Lanka in this context?
Oh, yeah.
That's my colleague. Yes, hi, hello. This is my colleague.
As far as we know about the curriculum of Chinese Buddhist Academy, Pali is one of the major subjects they have to learn too. And then the opportunity of learning Pali in China is not that great. So they are sending the students, graduate students, to Sri Lanka, especially for learning the Pali and the Theravada Buddhism too. So Pali is considered as no change, without change, considered as the essential language of the Buddhism and the sutras.
However, in regard to Sanskrit, I mean, you can see very clearly at the Nanhai Academy we mentioned that was actually opened in 2017. And it teaches Mahayana, Theravada, and Vajrayana traditions. And the languages of instruction are Chinese, Tibetan, and Pali. Sanskrit is not on the curriculum. And so this is what the Buddhist Association is institutionally creating and establishing as foundational languages. Whether that has much effect beyond China, we don't really know, but at least that's the trend in China. And as Yoshiko mentioned, Sri Lanka is seen as a site of sort of authentic Buddhism. And so it's very important where many younger monks go to study for a year or so. And there are a number of Buddhist academies that have many Chinese clerics studying in them, actually.
Okay, great. And my apologies, Kyo, I said this is a question that she is asking. I should have said this is a question that Kyo, is asking. So my apologies there. I just wanted to note that we are now at 5 minutes past the hour. Yoshiko and David have kindly agreed to stay with us for a little bit longer, so I think we will be able to fit in a few more questions, and I think we have a really rich discussion going, so let's keep moving through them. So this next question comes from John Owen, who says, you mentioned that China is setting its Buddhism in competition with other versions, for example, Tibetan and Zen Buddhism, addressing Chinese soft power in the West in particular. Since these other versions of Buddhism have quite a head start, do you think that China will succeed in using Chinese Buddhism as a tool of soft power? Might the attempt even backfire in the West? I'm thinking in particular of the strong following that the Dalai Lama has and the damage to China's brand that has resulted from it.
No, so say one, so we answered.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, first of all, the success. We have a number of countries we've identified in, I think, about a dozen countries in the project. And one of the things we want to look at is what are the strategies for each country? Which ones are successful? Which ones are not, and why? So that's in fact an empirical question that we're not in a very strong position to address now. However, probably you can see empirically effects more clearly in Asian countries that are more economically dependent on China. And I would argue too that in countries which are more economically dependent even in the West, like Italy, for example, or where you have governments that are more concerned to maintain certain relationships with the Chinese government, then I think that this is a hypothesis, these activities of the Chinese government would translate somehow into having political effects.
And I don't think that the Chinese government promoted Chinese Buddhism to confront with other Buddhism in the host countries. That's something they really wanted to avoid. So they have different strategy to give the influence through the Buddhism to the host countries. Like a case of Sri Lanka, there's no way for the Chinese Buddhism to confront with the Theravada Buddhism, or all the population there, the Theravada Buddhists. So they even hasn't started, as far as I know, to build a Chinese temple there. But they are sending the students to these Sri Lankan temples and then to make them have good education there. And they also support huge money for the renovation of the temples and getting the new equipments of the broadcastings, all the things. So, and they also, the head monk, the kind of very top monks in Chinese government, in China, often visit the Sri Lanka and make a bow to the head monks there. So there are many different kinds of relationship with what they really wanted to avoid is confrontations with the local communities, local populations, local Buddhism. That I think it was all.
I would also add here too that I think this is sort of a long-term game or strategy in a way, it's not. There are no specific short-term markers, particularly in the case of Western countries, that Buddhism is really kind of a marginal in terms of Christianity. But clearly the attempt is to try to increase the presence of Buddhist voices in these countries that are sympathetic or understand religion and Buddhism in the PRC. And the long-term implications, it's still unclear, but it's a long-term strategy.
Yeah. It's good questions in terms of the relationship with the Dalai Lama led Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. So we really try to have close focus on this kind of encounter of this Buddhism.
Just to give a little thing, there's supposedly Zhou Enlai, when asked about what were the effects of the French Revolution, he's reported to have said, "It's too early to tell."
Again, it's very right. But one thing that I try to add is that it's true that China is now trying to Sinonizing the Tibetan Buddhism within China. So and so they don't make a clear confrontation abroad, but they make their own Tibetan Buddhism by their own tradition, which is under the control of the government. So this is another strategy of and then they might send this kind of Tibetan Buddhism to abroad. So
I would also add too that this is a strategy directed to China as well, in Chinese. I mean, what the government is promoting in China is promoting abroad. When Chinese citizens now go abroad, they can visit these large Chinese temples, and they can go back to China convinced that, hey, Chinese Buddhism is great. It's a world religion. I mean, so there are multiple really ways of assessing success, including effects within China as well of the activities abroad. That might not be influences on the religion per se, but on other things. So excellent question. It's complicated at this point.
Okay, great. And I'll note, Yoshiko and David, that some of these are kind of comments rather than questions, just in response to things that you've said or suggestions for you to consider. And we'll make sure that you receive kind of a transcript of the question box after our session this evening. So what will be the final question today comes from Sean O'Shannon, and it's quite simply asking you where the Falun Gong movement fits into all of this.
We can answer to the questions, to your question, to her question, from the side of the Buddhism. Actually, when this Falun Gong thing happened, we were in China. And
when the day of the crackdown, we were there.
In China, we were actually doing the research and do some work. And then what we really saw was that the Buddhism really make a clear demarcation between the Buddhism and the Falun Gong. And then so that is a moment that the Buddhism really decided to set up the Buddhism as a kind of pure Buddhism in a sense, get rid of this kind of any kind of popular culture, popular cult issues from that, and that this accidents or events, or how do you say not events? How do you say that?
The crackdown.
The crackdown. The crackdown.
1999.
Give the side effects to the Buddhism to keep them within a line, to stick into the Buddhism things only. So that's what we saw. And they didn't make that much kind of criticism or anything in the public state. They did at the very beginning for this Falun Gong things. This is superstitions and all things, but that helps to, in a sense, purification of the Buddhism itself.
I would also add here too several other things. I mean, the crackdown was in 1999, and as Yoshiko just said. This led to greater government concern with clarifying boundaries between religion. And I mean, many of the things that go on in the name of Buddhism in China would not be recognized by Buddhist clerics as Buddhism. There are various kinds of popular and folk practices and customs and so forth. And this is just speculation at this point, but it was really in the early 2000s that the Chinese government began also promoting, Buddhism as culture. And so one could see that Falun Gong made the Chinese government realize that there are various types of meditation practices, breathing exercises, various types of things that you can't simply suppress. You can't get rid of it.
Right.
And so they began to incorporate it into the state system by redefining these things as Chinese Buddhism, as culture. And so that is sort of, and then of course, these ideas of Buddhism as culture and so forth, this is also one aspect of what's now being globally promoted. So that would be one way to look at this. But I think within China, my understanding is that within China, Falun Gong doesn't really exist. It's seen as being a success story and having gotten rid of it. And it's much more active abroad. And it's sort of centered, I think, in New York now and everything. Australia. And so maybe again, trying to create an alternative culture. Now, emphasizing Buddhism as culture, in some ways, could be seen as being competitive with this, but we're not quite sure yet. This would be something we'd look into. It's an excellent question.
Yeah, right.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we're right coming up on 1/4 the hour, and I think we do need to wrap things up. So Yoshiko and David, thank you so much for giving us such wonderful fodder for an incredibly rich discussion. And I think I speak for all of us when we wish you all the best with this ongoing research and cannot wait to see the the writing and further publications that come out of it. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. Just a reminder that if you check the chat box, I once again posted a link to the landing page for the Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power project. And I would urge you to first and foremost go there immediately and download Yoshiko and David's policy brief. And you'll have an opportunity then to check out the various other publications and products coming out of the project. And we want to again extend our thanks to the Carnegie Corporation of New York for their generous support of this project. So this is the point in the evening when under ordinary circumstances there would be thunderous and rapturous applause. So please know, Yoshiko and David, that you have our great thanks. Cheers works as well. And thank you all for being with us. And we hope to see you again at a future Berkeley Center webinar. Take care, everyone. Stay healthy. Good night and good morning.